everyone, and welcome to PowerPoint number 11. This is talking about the Catholics, some revolts that we're going to talk about, and the 18th century. So, this is your last PowerPoint before you take your final. Make sure that you have good notes. Make sure you've kept track of them. If for some reason you are missing a week or something, you better message me as soon as you can, because I am not going to let you have any other PowerPoints next week. So make sure you're taking good notes. All right. So, first thing we're going to talk about is the Catholic missions. So as New Mexico was being established by the Spanish, and Santa Fe had been established, we talked about Santa Fe in the last PowerPoint, as it was being created and more of the Spanish and people of Mexico City were coming into New Mexico, they started to set up missions. When the Spanish decided to stay in New Mexico, the main goal was to continue the work of missionaries. The priest wanted to Hispanize the Indians, which means that they wanted to make them as Hispanic as possible. They wanted to make them Spanish. They wanted them to learn Spanish. They wanted to practice the same religion. They wanted them to stop believing in their own customs and culture. So missionaries were the people who were trying to convert them. Okay. So the Indians were expected to act, speak, and practice religion like the Spanish. They were punished if they practiced their own beliefs. So not only were they forced to work for them, now they were punished for not following the same religion. The Indians came to resent the Spanish, meaning they didn't like them. And the more and more they hung around, the more and more they wanted them to leave. The priests in the colonial government struggled for power. So the priests believed that they had just as much right to be there and to control the Native Americans as the government and the governor had. And so they argued over who controlled the Indians. The priests believed that it was their job to control them because they were supposed to turn them into Catholics. And the royal governor and the regidores believed it was their job to control them. And it was kind of a fight between them. So, the Pueblo Revolt. As the Native Americans are being forced into more and more of something they don't want to do, they start to think about revolting or fighting back. So by 1680, many Pueblos had lost their patience with the Spanish. To restore peace and harmony, the Pueblos decided they needed to rid themselves of the Spanish. So they thought, we need to get rid of the Spanish before it's too late. So Pope, a shaman from the San Juan Pueblo, led the rebellion. He sent messages to the Pueblo villages. So all the Pueblo villages received the same message. The messengers carried knotted ropes, signifying how many days until the uprising. So they sent a messenger. There was a rope that was given to them that said, each day untie a knot. And when you untie a knot, whenever you're done untying the knots, that's when you should fight back. Thousands of Pueblos attacked Spanish settlements at the same time. So it was, even though they had no way of coordinating any actual fight, they were able to coordinate this one by using a messenger system. This was the first time the Pueblos had came together for a common purpose. So this was the first time they'd ever done anything like this. So the Spanish fled back to Mexico. And when I say the Spanish, I mean, I'm talking all of them fled back. Like, nobody wanted to stay there. It made them fearful to stay there because the Indians just attacked them. So for the next 12 years, the Pueblo Indians destroyed what was left of the Spanish buildings, churches, and homes. So for 12 years, the Spanish were gone, and the Pueblos destroyed everything. They destroyed Santa Fe. They destroyed the plaza. They destroyed everything that was left of them. And, but that didn't keep them away. So the Spanish returned. In 1692, so 12 years later, the Spanish returned to New Mexico, this time led by Don Diego de Vargas. He was chosen to lead the reconquest of New Mexico. He traveled to New Mexico with a small group of soldiers, and the Indians did not fight them. So when they arrived and Vargas arrived with his soldiers, the Native Americans just kind of looked at him and didn't fight back, and it seemed peaceful. Vargas wanted a peaceful reconquest, and within a year, it seemed peace and Spanish rule had been restored. So they brought the Spanish back in, and it seemed like the Pueblos didn't even remember having revolted and didn't remember what had happened 12 years before that. But peace did not last long. Vargas left New Mexico to return with more settlers and soldiers. So Vargas showed up, peacefulness happened, and then he went back to go get settlers and more soldiers so that he could bring them back because he said, it was peaceful. It was great. When he returned, the Spanish had to fight the Indians for control of Santa Fe. So the soldiers that he left behind were all killed, and he had to regain Santa Fe. But this time he had to do it with a lot more people and even settlers. After the Reconquest, new towns were created, including Albuquerque. So Albuquerque didn't exist until the Reconquest of New Mexico in 1692. And it's hard to believe now that Albuquerque didn't exist at all, as big as it is. It's hard to believe that any city there was nothing there. Just a valley. So 18th century New Mexico. Now, 18th century, remember, is actually the 1700s. So anytime you talk about we're in the 21st century because we're in the 2000s, okay? So, so you just make sure you understand that is in the 1700s. So most settlers lived on small farms or large estates called haciendas. The Spanish began expanding into New Mexico through land grants. The settlers lived on small farms or large estates, and that's pretty much what everybody did. But they started expanding even further when they started receiving these land grants. So land grants kept happening, just like we talked about before. If you will come and live here and you will work on the land, we will give you a piece of that land. So Spanish settlers made a living by farming, raising livestock, and hunting buffalo. Sheep were the most popular livestock by 1750. There were more than 100,000 sheep in New Mexico. It's kind of hard to believe. I can't even imagine that being the number one livestock, but that's what it was. Sheep was the number one livestock in 1750. Buffalo hunters, traveled the plains area in search of buffalo. When they killed the buffalo, they used every part. So often you can't even, if you have a beef or a pig or something butchered in today's society, we don't eat everything. I don't eat liver, and I don't eat the heart, and I don't eat the tongue, and I don't eat the bones. I don't eat all that stuff. But the buffalo hunters used everything. Buffalo tongue was a very popular delicacy that people ate back then, and I just can't even imagine. But so the buffaloes were killed, and they were used. They carved them up, and they used every part of them, and their hides were something that were very important because they kept a lot of people warm and stuff. So that was pretty common. And then we have cowboys, or vaqueros, were also popular in New Mexico. So riding, roping, branding, clothing terms, music, and rodeos date back to the early vaqueros. So these early cowboys, they didn't compete in what would be like rodeos, or they didn't do those kinds of things, but they did rope, and they did do things like that. And so it's kind of cool. And this was the beginning, these cowboys were the beginning of the Wild West in this time frame. The Wild West is my absolute favorite time era. Sorry, I can't even talk. Time era. And I think it's just fascinating that that the Wild West existed. But so this is kind of where it originated, and people that were cowboys of the time, they turned into the Wild West outlaws and things like that. So living peacefully together. During the 1700s, relations between the Spanish and the Pueblos improved. However, there were several hostile tribes in New Mexico for the Spanish to deal with. The Comanches and the Utes were located on the eastern plains. So they were the most hostile tribes. They were also nomadic. They followed buffalo herds. They did not have permanent homes, so they often lived in teepees. And they were fierce warriors. They were excellent horsemen. They had horses. They would be the ones that you would see riding without saddles, and maybe just a piece, maybe not even having anything, a bridle or anything on the horse's head. And so they were great horsemen. They were excellent warriors, and they were fierce and often raided communities and settlements and killed settlers and things like that. So they raided villages, stole children, and they traded with the Spanish. So the Comanches and the Utes were the hostile tribes. They were the tribes that were located in the present day where we live. They lived on the plains. And because it was vast, there was not, and this is where the buffalo lived. This is where the buffalo roamed. No pun intended. The Spanish brought diseases that would eventually diminish the Indians in New Mexico and their raiding. So, as the Spanish kept coming into New Mexico, the Native Americans of that time were not immune to the diseases. Just like when the Spanish first arrived in the Aztec and Inca empires, they just weren't immune to those diseases. Diseases killed a lot of the natives that lived here, and it was very difficult for Native Americans to survive any of those diseases. Over time, they created immunity, but early on, it killed a lot of them. All right, so that is the last slide for our PowerPoint this time around. This is our final PowerPoint before you take your big final coming up next week. And so I want you to make sure that you're taking good notes. Reach out to me. Let me know if you need any help or anything. Make sure you have all your notes together for next week. And that's pretty much it.